Conference, this has been an important debate, and as that video has just reminded us, it comes after a quite extraordinary summer. Now, I know that it is customary to end these debates by quoting past speakers, and we've had some great contributions this morning. But I want to start my remarks to you not by quoting the words of a politician or even of an activist, but instead the words of an athlete. Because for me, the quiet but fierce pride that the video reminded us of, that so many of us felt in Britain this summer, was best captured when a journalist asked the following question to Mo Farah. "Wouldn't you rather have run for Somalia?" asked the journalist. "Listen, mate," replied Mo, "this is my country. This is where I come from, and when I put on a Great Britain vest, I am proud. I am very proud." Now, Conference, let's just contrast for a moment those remarkable sentiments with the most famous, or perhaps I should say infamous, remarks of the summer from a Conservative politician, one Mr. Aidan Burley MP. Remember him? What was his response to Danny Boyle's extraordinary evocation of our island story with its fitting tribute to the suffragettes and to the trade unionists, to the Windrush and to our National Health Service? He wasn't proud like the rest of us. He called it lefty multicultural crap. Now, the reason I remind you of those revealing, if revolting, sentiments of Mr. Burley is that they reflect a quintessentially conservative idea. Stop the modern world, we want to get off. And that conservative idea, alas, is apparent not just when the modern world comes to Britain, as it did this summer, but when this Conservative government tries to reach out to the modern world. Conference, Britain exists in a modern world in which everyone is connected to everyone, everything to everything, a world of quite unimaginable interdependence. And the fundamental flaw of the Conservatives' approach to foreign policy is that 2 years into office, they remain damagingly unreconciled to that modern truth. Let's take the most pressing, the most urgent example. Of course, it's Europe. Does it matter to Britain? Absolutely. Does it require fundamental reform? Certainly. Does this Conservative government have a clue how to affect that reform in Britain's national interest? Absolutely not. Now, we all know that change is coming to Europe, and that is why, under Ed Miliband's leadership, Labour will argue for reform in Europe, not exit from Europe. Why will we make that case for Britain? We make that case because British jobs, British exports, and yes, British influence in the wider world benefits from Britain's continued membership of the European Union. Now, of course, next week we will no doubt hear some boasts and some blusters from David Cameron about Europe as he tries to assuage his ever-restive backbenchers. But let's be honest about why that is happening. It's happening because if you start with a bunch of Aidan Burleys on your backbenches, you end up with the fiasco of the non-veto last December, where the Conservative frontbench managed to unite the whole of Europe. The only problem is they managed to unite them against the United Kingdom. So when you hear David Cameron next week, remember this truth. The real tragedy, the national tragedy, is that the Conservatives have marginalised Britain's voice in Europe just when it matters most. 2 years into office, Conference, that is David Cameron in a nutshell. Out of touch at home, out of his depth abroad. Because, Conference, let's try and figure this out. What is the Conservative strategy on Europe? Nothing, it's a blank page. What's the Conservative strategy for the G20? Nothing, it's a blank page. What's the Conservative strategy for the World Trade Organization today? Nothing, it's a blank page. What even, as we heard in the defence part of the debate, is the Conservatives' strategy for NATO? Nothing, it's a blank page. You see, the Conservatives just don't get it. They don't understand that in the modern world, British citizens are stronger and safer when we cooperate and collaborate effectively with our international partners. And that blindness to the need to network in the modern world is at times damaging and at times dangerous. When David Cameron became the Prime Minister of the country in May 2010, he said this, and this is a direct quotation: "Afghanistan will be my government's #1 foreign policy priority." Conference, that is as it should be. With thousands of young British men and women still in harm's way in Afghanistan, they deserved nothing less. Now, we have heard again from some members of the British Armed Forces on this platform in this debate. They are quite simply the best of British, and they deserve once again our thanks and appreciation. But Conference, the young men and women in harm's way in Afghanistan deserve something more than our public applause. They deserve from the British government a political strategy worthy of their military heroism and their military efforts. And yet, David Cameron, the self-same Prime Minister who told us in May 2010 that Afghanistan would be his #1 foreign policy priority, has now not made a single speech on Afghanistan to the House of Commons in 14 months. Conference, that is shameful. And so, Conference, from this platform, I say today to David Cameron, break your silence on Afghanistan. Take the risks for a sustainable settlement, and we in the Labour Party will support you. But Conference, if that approach is to be successful, of course it involves working with our international partners. And nowhere is that need for a joined-up, coordinated approach more evident today than in relation to the Middle East. Just last week, President Abbas flew to New York and made a speech at the United Nations at which he made the case to upgrade the representation of the Palestinians. Since that speech, we have heard from the British government only the sound of silence. Conference, I give you my word today. If I was Britain's Foreign Secretary, I would not sit on the fence. I would not sit on my hands, and I would break that silence. I would use my voice, and yes, I would use my vote to upgrade the representation of the Palestinians at the United Nations. Conference, let me be clear. To continue to build settlements on other people's land is wrong and it is illegal. But Conference, so too is firing rockets into Israel to terrorize the population of that country. So when people ask you, which side is Labour on in the issue of the Middle East? Answer them with confidence. Labour stands for peace and justice in the Middle East. We stand for a negotiated solution in the Middle East. And we will argue and we will work for a secure Israel living alongside a viable Palestinian state. Now, Conference, we will also need to work with international partners in the months and years ahead on the issue of Iran's nuclear ambitions. Again, let me try and be clear with you. For Israel to launch a preemptive strike against Iran now cannot be justified, but nor can Iran's continued evasion and hate-filled rhetoric towards Israel. That is why it is vital that the British government continues to support the efforts of our own Cathy Ashton in pursuing a peaceful resolution to the crisis continuing to afflict the world. The international community must be as one in opposing nuclear proliferation. But, Conference, we must also work for a peaceful resolution to the crisis in Syria. After 18 months, the sheer scale of the slaughter and the suffering being endured by the people of Syria demands that the British government, as one of the permanent members of the Security Council, does not give up, but now redoubles its efforts to find the elusive unity in the international community and work not to escalate the violence in Syria, but to de-escalate the violence in that country. Now, Conference, over the last difficult decade in the Middle East, we have learned many lessons. So let me try and be straight with you. I understand that we have to win back trust. A future Labour government will work tirelessly for peace. We will only contemplate the use of force where it is absolutely necessary. But it would be as foolish as it would be futile for me to stand on this platform and suggest to you that the future for Labour and the future for Britain involved retreating from a world quite as interconnected as the world in which we now live. Whether it is commerce or communication, whether it is tourism or trade, the fate and fortune of British citizens are now bound together with the fate and fortune of people living thousands of miles from our shores. It is not imperial delusions that give you strength in that interdependent world. It is the capacity to cooperate and collaborate with other countries. We understand that. The Conservatives just don't get it. They are weakening our economy at home. They are weakening our influence abroad. They are out of touch at home. They are out of their depth abroad. And that is why, working together, Conference, we must make sure that they are soon out of power. Thank you.